I was a panelist at Nexus 2024, and we had a panel called Cosmere 401 where we discussed deep Cosmere connections and invested entities. And here are the highlights. So we first discussed the vocab words of the Cosmere: investiture, fortune, connection, identity, that type of stuff. If you know what those are, you're good. If you don't, let me know in the comments. I'll make a separate video. Most of the panel, we ended up focusing on cognitive shadows because that is a wild topic. And let's kind of break into what a cognitive shadow is. First off, a cognitive shadow is a person or entity that has surpassed mortality through the use of some sort of magical means. There's a lot of different ways to do that. We've seen multiple different circumstances in the Cosmere. The most obvious ones are the fused, the heralds, and the returned, but there's a lot more than that. So in the Stormlight Archive, we've got the fused and the heralds. Those are cognitive shadows due to the fact that they were once mortals, and a shard intentionally infused them with power so that they could surpass death and continue living even after their mortal bodies had died. In Mistborn, we have Kelsier, who, very similar, but he did it himself, where he took the power by himself, infused himself, and said, nope, I'm not going to die. Very Kelsier of him. In Warbreaker, we've got the Court of Gods, right? The Returned. Also very similar to the Fused and the Heralds, where a god took a being, infused them with power, and made them last after life. However, the Returned are different because those beings already died. Now we get into the nitty-gritty of it. See where I'm going with this? I'm sitting down again because this is why we call this Cosmere 401. Something you need to know about cognitive shadows is that they are debatably more spren than person at this point, and they follow the rules of a cognitive entity, where their identity is kind of defined by perception of them, cognitive perception. Kind of like how a spren will change how the public thinks about them. They have to follow what the cognitive perception of them is. This example in the Court of Gods in Warbreaker, how all of the gods, the Returned, they appear how people think they should. How Lightsong, the Bold, is a strong, tall, muscular man, and how the god of beauty and connections is a lusty, busty, frivolous type character. They all follow these very cognitive identities of themselves, and that's very important. So I talked about the heralds, the fused, the returned. We have Kelsier, but we also have the Yoki Hijo from Yumi, our cognitive shadows. The nightmares are cognitive shadows. The shades are cognitive shadows. The Stormfather himself is a cognitive shadow. See, the Stormfather was turned into a cognitive shadow by being given the personality and memories of honor, making him Tanavast's cognitive shadow. Stormfather's a weird circumstance because he was a spren that was turned into a cognitive shadow. Normally it's a person turned into a cognitive shadow. Or is it? You see, Vasher has an idea. He claims that cognitive shadows are like fossils, where their soul has been replaced by investiture. He himself says they're more spren than people, that they are spren masquerading as people. And I think that's something very important to note. See, I think that the Returned in Warbreaker are essentially a spren. We're playing a little loose with the terminology here, but I think the divine breath, right, the thing that makes the Returned a Returned, is a chunk of investiture. That endowment then placed the personality of the individual that died, attached that to the divine breath, gave that sentience, and that is what the Returned is. Now, this was the debate we had in the panel, right? Is a cognitive shadow the same person? If we compare this to real life, well, real life, science fiction, if you were to upload your brain to a computer and then somebody were to communicate with that computer, is that program you? Or is it just a copy of you? Is it an AI pretending to be you? That's the question about a cognitive shadow. Is the cognitive shadow the person, or is it a spren copying the person? Now that is a whole nother topic for a whole other video, but I want you guys to talk about that in my comments because this is one of my favorite things to discuss, is these very deep Cosmere connections. And that's why I'm called the Cosmere Academy, because I want to study and discuss and learn about these things, and I want you to do it with me.